The main reason I created the Game OverThinker was, well, alright, the main reason was because I wanted to become nerd famous and receive sexual attention from hot cosplay chicks on the convention circuit. But close second, I wanted to do my part to facilitate more thinking among my fellow gamers, which isn't to say that we don't think, we do, but maybe we could stand to think about bigger, broader, or even more relevant things once in a while, though still in relation to gaming, of course. I mean, yeah, it's fun to have a little thought experiment about Zelda continuity or try to hash out who would win between Mario and Master Higgins, but if we do that to the exclusion of all the other stuff hovering around us, I think we're doing ourselves a big disservice. So whenever possible, I like to break up my usual digressions on gaming minutia with some bigger socio-cultural stuff. Sometimes that means going off on a tangent, other times things fall right smack dab in my fucking lap. Which brings us to Shadow Complex. Now, first things first, in the past I've been guilty of not citing enough sources for more newsworthy episodes, though, in my defense, by the time I usually get around to newsworthy episodes, they've been so re-reported that it's sometimes difficult to identify an original source with the exception of specific quotes. That's not and will not be the case this time. The plain fact is that no matter how good I can make this episode, anything I have to say can at best only hope to be a minor footnote to the stellar work that many luminaries of the game's journalism world have turned in covering the issue, and in terms of researching this article, I'm indebted to the work of Stephen Totillo at Kotaku, Christian Nutt at Gamasutra, Nick DiNicola at Pop Matters, and GayGamer.net, among many others I'm surely forgetting, and I encourage anyone with further interest in the ongoing Shadow Complex controversy to read up as much as they can from these and other sources. So then, just so we're all on the same page, Shadow Complex is a record-shattering Xbox Live Arcade download that's trying so hard to be retro it might as well star Disco Stew. A 2.5D side-scroller with gameplay best described as Metroid crossed with Metroid divided by Metroid with a remainder of Metroid, even its decidedly SNES-era storyline in which a spelunking couple inadvertently stumble into the massive underground installation of a high-tech paramilitary faction seems calculated to leave the impression of the best game 1993 never produced. Having played the game, I feel comfortable in pronouncing it pretty damn good overall, but we're not here to review the game. We're here to talk about the broader issues that led to its recent boycott. Oh, the call to boycott a video game isn't anything new, of course, but what's new here is the people doing it. Not a bunch of anti-gaming busybodies, but rather a vocal group of gamers. Why? Well, as it turns out, Shadow Complex is framed as a prequel to Empire, a science fiction novel written by genre fixer Orson Scott Card, best known to those outside of science fiction fandom as the writer of Ender's Game and, Ender's Game. In addition to writing, Card is also an outspoken political activist, specifically as a vocal opponent of gay marriage. He even serves on the board of directors for the powerful National Organization for Marriage, which features as one of its goals the maintaining of laws rendering homosexual behavior itself against the law. Okay, let's stop right here. Time out. Look, I know it's both futile and naive to try and narrow the scope of any ensuing discussion, but it would be really nice if we could maybe keep this from degenerating into a debate over whether or not you agree with Mr. Card's political opinions, since that's not really the point here. In this particular context, I'm not really interested in how you or anyone else feels about gay marriage. That's another topic for another place and time. This is about the collision of creator and/or player politics with gaming. The actual issue causing the controversy is largely incidental. If this was people boycotting tabula rasa because Richard Garriott donated money to Hillary Clinton, I'd like to think I'd be approaching it in the same basic way, just with a different set of proper nouns. So, yeah. Back on track. Yes, you can probably extrapolate what happened from there. It didn't take long for some gamers and some game journalists to begin asking the question of whether or not folks who were on the other side of the issue from Card ought to boycott the game and/or try to persuade others to do the same. It's worth understanding, I think, that to folks who are serious about these sort of things, a boycott is often less about the symbolism and more about the practical monetary concerns. Orson Scott Card isn't just any gay marriage opponent, argue boycott supporters. He's a top-ranking member of a major anti-gay activist group and contributes his own money to the cause. Therefore, a certain mathematical perspective dictates that a portion of any money made by Shadow Complex will eventually find its way back to Card and thus may wind up helping to fund his political goals. Now, to my mind, the solution here is pretty straightforward. If you feel strongly about a political issue and learn that an individual who is either part of or a financial contributor to the other side of that issue makes money from the sales of a product, a perfectly reasonable response is to decide not to buy it. For example, plenty of folks avoid doing business with Domino's Pizza because its founder donates money to the militant anti-abortion organization Operation Rescue. Gamers who support gay marriage and thus opted not to buy Shadow Complex are exercising the exact same freedom of expression that Card is when he opts to donate money to his cause. That's pretty cut and dry from where I sit. Still, the broader industry implications are in my view a little more complicated. Gaming is still a young medium, and the idea of controversial political ideas being associated with a game or factoring into gamers' buying decisions is still new territory for a lot of us, especially those of us on the journalism end, who tend to be older and grounded more in an era where games were mostly about chunky men in silly hats saving their girlfriends or other pleasantly apolitical activities. That's not entirely the case anymore, and if we want games to continue exploring bigger and more thoughtful ideas, the Faustian trade-off will mean more controversies like this, and more uneasy considerations for a lot of us to make. With Shadow Complex, the controversy was all about Card himself. Nothing in the game had any connection to his politics, at least not the ones in question. But what if that hadn't been the case? Would you buy or avoid buying a game because of a political or philosophical idea expressed within it? Would you prefer game makers stayed out of the political arena so that more people could enjoy the product, or would you accept the inevitable polarization of certain responses as just a trade-off for seeing games tackle weightier themes? I think that for gamers, these questions are a bit more complicated than they are when it comes to books or films, since gaming tends to have two separate sets of criteria. Story and theme are nice to have, but gameplay and presentation are the real stars, or so we keep saying. So what if you're presented with a game that has a great mechanic and is a ball to play, but whose story is philosophically reprehensible to you? So far, we haven't really had to deal with anything like that in the big leagues of mainstream gaming. The closest I can think of are the Cabela hunting games, which are probably by default the best technical executions of the simulated hunting genre. Naturally, these games are generally viewed as revolting by people who are morally opposed to hunting animals, but generally speaking, those people probably have no interest in a hunting sim anyway. I seriously doubt that any of them have had a serious moral debate with themselves in the vein of, ooh, I really hate deer hunting, but I'm really craving a well-made deer hunting simulation. For the most part, big-ticket mainstream video games have stayed out of politically or philosophically divisive content, and when a game does have something relevant to say, it's usually the sort of stuff that isn't as controversial as people tend to think it is. Environmentalism, for example, has always been a political hot potato, but hardly anyone is going to bitch about the latest kids game telling the little ones not to litter. The Metal Gear series comes down hard against the increased dehumanization of modern military, but by casting as its hero a grizzled alpha male warrior, it's able to deftly walk the razor's edge of political perception, enabling liberals to see a damning indictment of the military-industrial complex, whilst also allowing conservatives to see the story of an old-school hero in the John Rambo mold, taking down dishonorable and corrupt modern mercenaries around him. Army of Two goes at the same kind of material, but rather than splitting political hairs, it just treats the whole situation as a sick joke. Just about the only important game in recent memory that I can recall making a real active effort at a political point, or in this particular case, political counterpoint, was of course Bioshock. For the uninitiated, the game finds the player trapped in an underwater city that was designed by an industrialist named Andrew Ryan as an ideal society according to his own radical individualist philosophical beliefs. A world where artists, scientists, inventors, and business people could pursue their aims entirely for their own profit and self-edification without the moral, legal, or social constraints that might have held them back on the surface. Of course, by the time we get there, the place has devolved into a state of dystopian apocalypse, and while the game clearly has a certain affection for Ryan's idealism, it's equally clear about depicting his philosophy as being both too easily abused by criminal elements and too insufficiently capable of accounting for the depths some people will sink to when morality and societal obligation are removed from their spectrum. However, Ryan's beliefs aren't just something they made up for the game. They have a very specific source: objectivism, a political philosophy originated by Ayn Rand, regarded as one of the most influential and controversial political thinkers of the 20th century. Objectivism itself is pretty difficult to summarize in this context, but in the broad strokes it can be viewed as a hardline, fundamentally humanistic subset of the libertarian political movement, of which Rand is considered one of the three founding mothers. Suffice it to say, damn near everything that comes out of Andrew Ryan's mouth might as well come from her. Thus, since Bioshock's story ultimately takes form as an admiring but finally negative critique of the fictional Ryan and Rapture, it's also a very real admiring but ultimately negative critique of Ayn Rand and objectivism. Now, granted, there aren't really a lot of card-carrying objectivists running around these days, and even most of the kids who call themselves libertarians don't know what the fuck it means, but put yourself in the shoes of a theoretical objectivist gamer for a minute. Here's this undeniably fantastic game, but its whole story is basically a takedown of a philosophy that's a huge part of your life and probably means a great deal to you. Yeah, deal with the criticism, whatever doesn't kill you, gameplay is more important, and so on. That's easy to say when you're not the one under fire, you know? So let's try a really extreme hypothetical. What if the plot of the next Mega Man game involved Dr. Wily unsurprisingly becoming a huge posthumous Michael Crichton fan, and this time using the Robot Masters to stage natural disasters making global warming look worse than it actually is, so that he can make a fortune selling people green light bulbs? So, your typical awesome, glorious Mega Man gameplay, but garnished with a scathing rebuke of the environmentalism movement. Now, if you were a Mega Man fan and an environmentalist, is this going to be a little awkward for you? Sure, engaged debate is healthy and will probably help strengthen your arguments and as an intellectual exercise, but doesn't that kind of interrupt the purity of your Mega Man fix? Again, that's hypothetical, but I don't think this will be a mere thought experiment for much longer. We keep saying we want games that are more narratively complex and intellectually challenging, and those things just don't come without bringing controversy, politics, and polarization with them. Like it or not, I think the Tempest in a Teapot over Shadow Complex is a harbinger of things to come. For example, did you know that in addition to creating Earthworm Jim, Doug Tenable is a political commentator over at Andrew Breitbart's right-wing pseudo-celebrity wildlife preserve Big Hollywood? Well, you can bet that if we ever see another Earthworm Jim game, we'll see some of his more interesting ruminations dragged into the discussion, whether it has anything to do with the game or not. And to my mind, that's too bad. Not necessarily because of what the man believes, but rather it could end up coloring the perception of a series that never really picked an ideological fight with anyone, and that would be a shame for everyone involved. But also, it's probably inevitable. Nothing gets to grow up without losing some of its innocence. Apparently, not even video games. Boy, that was kind of a downer once again, huh? So, next time, I promise to find something happy to talk about. Really.